Mr. Alan with us, who is the CVC and Special Project Manager of Ananda Development. Firstly, I would like to thank you for taking the time for the interview.
Very happy to be here. Thank you very much.
So could you begin by telling us about your role in Ananda Development?
Sure. I've been with Ananda for about almost 5 years. And throughout my time there, my role has changed and evolved as the need for innovation has changed and evolved. In my current facility, I basically manage the CVC in a way that we discover projects and deal flow through events such as this, and we are able to effectively pivot those discoveries into real world trials in our development process. There's a whole kind of subsection of innovation theory. I'm actually starting to work on a PhD, so I'm starting to develop my real world experience into that. But that's the CVC side. So a lot of it is networking and then trying to translate that networking into either investable opportunities that are strategic or, opportunities that are just things that we can try in the real world, but might not have a financial incentive. The second part of my role is what we call Special Projects Manager. And this is effectively the operations side of what I find in CVC. So if we have a proof of concept or a pilot project, I effectively act as the manager, the project manager of that project. I leave the heavy lifting to the people whose special vertical it falls under. I'm not a engineer or anything to that effect. So I fall back on their expertise, but I help manage those projects.
Great. So what kind of technologies you are aiming at? Is it just around construction technology, or is it a much broader horizon you guys are tracing?
So I have a very, very wide gamut of what I cover. A lot of what we've done over the last few years is try and understand the pain points of our users and identify very clearly what are, I consider myself almost as an internal consultant. So who are my customer groups, right? I have a resident because our property development company builds residential projects. So I have a resident in customer. I also potentially have an investor in customer. Mm-hmm. I have the whole development cycle, that whole supply chain. We have a property management company. We also have a construction company under our umbrella. And then I have also internally, things like accounting and executive admin process. Yeah. So it's everything from DocuSign for that to Procore, which is like on the field in a worker's hands, to strategic development, like how do we enable fractional ownership through blockchain? So it's everything.
That's great. So being a CVC, what are the main criteria you look into in a startup before choosing that particular startup technology for the organization?
So we go through a process I alluded to earlier called the 4D process, which is what I'm trying to kind of trademark, as it were. So the first step of this is discovery. And discovery is very, very similarly follows the VC pipeline model, right? You need to see 1,000 things to narrow it down to, 1 or 2 good ideas you want to actually pursue. Right. And that can happen through networking events like Build World Tech. We also have a lot of interesting partnerships in Silicon Valley, like with Stanford. We are members of SciFi. We're also members of Singularity University. So that's kind of like the discovery funnel portion. That's the first step, the first D. Then we move into development, and that development is the relationship development. So sometimes there's a problem that's very clear and we need to find a solution for that problem. And that's pretty straightforward in developing the hypothesis of what we are going to test for. But occasionally we'll find something really cool that we didn't even know was an opportunity to improve, right? And there it's a bit of a solution looking for a problem. But if there is a developed, agreed potential benefit between like BUs or the different stakeholders and myself and the external discovered party, then we'll move ahead. And that moving ahead moves us into the third phase, which is deploy. And deploy effectively is running the test, right? So we might say this new electronic signature system will save us X days of process time, which equals, this much cost effectively. And we'll run the test and have milestones and have a hypothesis and then test against that. And then at the end, if it passes that test, we'll do the debrief. And if it's successful, we will move it into the fourth D, which is disrupt. So disrupt is, the old process was there for a reason, but we've tried something new and it shows benefit, so let's change it. And that's a whole change management aspect, which is a lot more about culture and people, and there's a lot of hand-holding required, and that's really where the tough work actually happens. The first three are fun, but the fourth one is the hard stuff.
Yeah. So that's interesting that you brought that up, because I wanted to know, do you face any challenge or obstacles when it comes to making a real estate developer or leaders understand on the importance of digital transformation and innovation?
So I think there's two answers to that question. The first is directly inside of the organization, and I've only worked in real estate in this one organization, so I only have that limited bit of knowledge to go from, but in talking to my compatriots in different organizations, it seems to be a common thing. This is a very legacy industry, and the people who have done these, built these companies have done so in a very conservative, straightforward way. And their risk tolerance is, not super high. And that's understandable because it's not software development. If the building crashes, the building actually crashes. It's not like the app crashing, right? Yeah. So that being said, I think a lot of it is understanding the balance of what the risk tolerance is inside the organization. And I think recently that has changed, especially with the pandemic, because it's moved us from a situation where these things were nice to have to now it's a required cost of business, right? So, it's kind of separating the really essential things and that was a nice to have project. But some things that the, executives were saying, that's 3, 5, 10 years out. Now the time scale is becoming much shorter because of the required digitalization. So that's the first answer, the internal executive part of things. There are difficulties there, but it's just about shifting mindsets. And that's happening rather rapidly because we have to, basically. It's adapt or die. The second challenge is a lot of what I find in discovery comes from places that are a lot more developed than where we live, which is Bangkok, Thailand. And because of this, a lot of the models don't necessarily transition over very smoothly. Just as a rough example, if you have a SaaS model where it's $1 per worker per day to do a timesheet check-in, right? Yeah. And the worker in the States is getting $400 a day or something, and the worker in Thailand is getting $8 a week. Yeah. It's a very different equation, right? So there is a little bit of difficulty working with some startups in trying to transition their models across. But if we work directly with them, especially if we have an investment, foreseeable future, then there's a lot more flexibility. And sometimes we can say, okay, instead of it being, $1 per worker, it's $1 per project manager or per site supervisor. So the cost, works better in this market, in this environment. And that actually helps them. It kind of goes back to the old saying, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. It used to be about New York. I think it's now more about emerging economies. Yeah.
So the platform that you're backing, how much importance do you give to the parameters of scalability towards solving global real estate problems? Since there have been instances that we have noticed where there have been many great ideas, but are only success in a particular geography.
I think that's part of the validation process, right? That's part of the discovery and development process. As I was just saying in the last question, there's a lot of cases where the model just doesn't fit for Southeast Asia. So I think that goes towards the filtering in the initial, funnel, steps of the funnel. The thing that we do try and pay attention to is understanding scalability, at least within our organization or our region. We work with a number of, I would say, coalitions, like groups. One is called Kaizen, one is Kakushin. And these are groups of developers and interior, and it's all the different elements of supply chain that we don't necessarily have, a stake in, but are very integral to the end product. And so if it's something like, as an example, BIM, where this can be used across a chain, there's a lot of importance in adhering to, okay, is everybody going to use this?
Yeah.
The adoption aspect, right? So we went through this, specifically with BIM 4 or 5 years ago, and we basically said, here's the cut date. From this period, if you do not, move the process along via BIM, you're not going to get the contract effectively. You're not going to continue to be a part of this forum. So everyone very quickly adopted it, and it was not, smooth. There's hurdles to learning anything, right? But now we see that initial technological investment and mindset investment as well is starting to pay off in spades, because there's a lot of ancillary programs and software that can piggyback on top of BIM specifically. And if we didn't make that change over, half a decade ago, we wouldn't be positioned in the place that we are now.
Okay, and which is the domain that looks exciting to you in particular, that has a good amount of need gap to be fulfilled in the coming time?
So I would say probably 2 things are top of mind. The first is I believe that in the near future, there's going to be a lot more interest in investment opportunity. And a lot of our clients are, investors. There's a good portion of our owners that wind up being investors from different areas around the region, not even Thai, right? There are a lot of barriers to doing this for real estate, both from a socioeconomic perspective as well as just a process. Trying to send millions of baht, potentially hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, wiring it internationally is very arduous. So and then if you don't have that amount of capital to meet that minimum threshold, that barrier to entry, then this investment opportunity is just outside of your reach. So a lot of what I'm looking forward in the next, let's say 2 years or so, and I've been working on this for about 2 years with the Thai regulators and regional regulators and my investment committees and my risk boards and everything like that, is to try and enable a better way of doing this, right? A modern and future-proofed way of doing this. So that's the first thing. And that obviously is looking at blockchain in a lot of different applications, right? Okay. The second is, I think with the pandemic, there is a lot of change in customer sentiment, right? Change in customer behavior. And I think it's apt time for us to kind of say, okay, we need to get back on the pulse of the customer, right? Mm-hmm. I don't expect there to be some, you read some time or some headlines, and it seems like there's a horrible trend and globalization is turning backwards and urbanization is turning back. I don't think it's that extreme, but I do think that there is a change in, customer behavior. And so we need to look back at, if there's going to be people living in a city center, what do they need to do that comfortably? Our motto is urban living solutions. So that is effectively what we do. You know, we provide a box for you to live in, but there has to be some additional benefit other than it's just, you know, there.
Yeah.
Even if it's a move out of the city and into, you know, the suburbs, is there a communication or a transportation, some type of pairing of these different things that we can do, whether with current technology or future technology, like aerial drones or, you know, different things like that, to
Yeah.
enable what the customer wants, where they want it, when they want it.
Interesting. So, which are the markets you are keeping tab upon where you believe the prop tech is moving much faster and you feel a lot can be learned from that particular prop tech market?
I think financial technology is a huge sector that's moving forward very quickly. If you look at China, you know, we have some friends at a few very large firms in China, and their digital and financial technology divisions are the fastest growing sectors inside of their businesses, right? If you look at, again, the headlines, there are huge IPOs coming up, and potentially the largest IPO in history is going to be a Chinese financial tech play. So I think that is, and it goes back to the ease or the burden of transacting, right? So I think that's a huge aspect of things. And moving towards the future, this could be adopted towards not only the large purchase, which is the home, but also all of the little things that ancillary make up the living experience, right? So if you think of life as an experience, you know, you have your transport, you have your communication, you have your food, you have your living, your home itself, you have your needs, shopping, things like that. And I think if we look at what WeChat's doing, and we extract that to other markets, there's an opportunity there, right? And there's players that are starting to fill those, like Grab in Southeast Asia and Uber in the States. But I still think that the home, which is kind of the hub of everything, is yet to tie into that very tightly, right? So I think the merger of financial technology and then some connectivity with the home, that will be a big play for the next 5 years.
Right. So in terms of the local market, if you have to compare with the global market, what kind of technology innovation you still feel that is still not being, you know, adapted or is still not in that advanced level as compared to the global market?
I think there are some things that surprisingly are below the expectations of the global market or the Western market as a benchmark, right?
Yeah.
One thing that's very common in our region is to have migrant labor, right? Some type of workforce that comes from another place that might not be trained and skilled and expertise. They're not unionized. They're not, you know, they didn't go to a school and have an engineering degree effectively, right? So both the opportunity that exists there, but also the challenge, because, you know, everybody thinks, oh, great, it's inexpensive labor. But the reality is there's a lot of potential hurdles to overcome, right? Things like, okay, you know, everything from recent issues with visas and pandemics to people going back home to communication issues. Literally, you know, the foreman and the workers don't speak the same language.
Right.
And when I look at technology, especially in the Western context, everyone is expected to have a smartphone, right? Everyone's expected to speak only English.
Yeah.
Everyone's expected to make a decent wage, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit of a hurdle in that translation, right?
Right.
Beyond that, I think really moving forward, one of the things we'll have to do is we will have to understand how manufacturing, right, the manufacturing phenomenon will impact our region, right, specifically. I think that it's starting definitely in Singapore, where you see like prefabrication and volumetric fabrication already happening,
Right.
and how that is impacting labor markets.
Yeah.
And I think that as robotization and the ability to kind of pop up these factories relatively easily, whether it's on site or at a central location, that interplay with the local labor and how that, I think that will be a unique kind of evolution in the terms of like labor and mechanization, automation in Southeast Asia compared to, America or Europe. Because I think that there's still going to be a pushback, right? If you can say, oh, I can hire 100 people at the cost of the one robot, the robot's got to be really efficient.
Yeah. Agreed. So tell me, as a CVC, and I'm sure our viewers would love to know more on this front, then what are the main challenges or obstacles you really face in your particular role?
I think the main problem that I have is I have two hurdles stacked up against me. One is I wind up being the dreamer. So I have to be the person who's like, but think about how this could change everything in 3 years. And people are very busy, right? People have their jobs and they're, very focused, and they have their blinders on a lot of the times. And I can't fault them for that, because that's their job and my job is not that, right? If I was responsible for making sure the building stayed up and making sure, the sales went through, and I'm sure I would not have time to do what I do. But it's a matter of trying to solve their problems kind of invisibly, right? So that's the first thing is I have to be the dreamer. How do I get them to buy into it without it really disrupting them too much, right? So if I can do invisible innovation, where I say, like one example is Procore, right? Where we have this communication system, and for some people, they just don't want to adopt it. They don't have the time. So there's a process by which you can get notified via email and respond via email. And it's like Procore doesn't exist to you. But for the people who need Procore, everything is cataloged, everything is tracked, even though it's just email to email, right? Yeah. So for them, they don't see it, they don't care, they don't have to log in, they don't have to worry about anything. For me and for the people who it matters to, it's a huge impact, right? So that's the first thing, is being the dreamer and trying to understand. The second kind of challenge that I face, and this is kind of the irony of I'm talking at Built World Tech Asia, right? But I am definitely not Asian. I'm from the States. I'm from Florida originally. It's a culture barrier, right? Yeah. And I think I have tried to make inroads with my colleagues, and I've built up a lot of trust after successful projects over a number of years. But definitely the first few years, and even to this day, there are still things that I bring up that if it wasn't for, oh, the CEO thinks that's what we need to do, or it's falling on deaf ears a bit. And it's a bit because looking at the context of myself against the executives who are making the decision effectively, I am somewhat younger. I am not Thai. And I don't come from a background, honestly, of real estate. So everything was taken with a grain of salt for a long period of time. But thankfully that after 4 or 5 years and a number of successful projects and helping to solve their problems and give them benefit, they trusted me a lot more.
Right. So I read some interesting articles where a lot of people, especially from the CVC, designation, has spoken about that. It's all about the mixture of art and science for a CVC designated person. So do you agree on the same, and would you like to share a bit on this?
Sure, absolutely. I do agree with that statement somewhat. I think if you take a purely analytical, by the numbers on the paper approach, you will miss opportunities. At the same time, if you're purely driven by the the passion play the vision, right, then you're going to fall into a lot of money pits. So, and not get a great return overall, and you're not going to have too much more injection of capital from your corporate, especially. So I think there is a mix, but ultimately what it comes down to, and I not only am involved with the Ananda CVC, but also part of my education, I went to Stanford for an executive program, and we launched a fund out of that called Reaction, and I act as a founding member and environmental advisor for that. So I think in both of these, a lot of it comes down to, we call it the AAA association. So it's an A+ leader, right? Meaning they have some type of experience or some type of commitment, they're passion, they're driven, it's the original founder who's involved. There's A+ ideas, right? And that is just, is this something that can move the needle? What is the massively transformative purpose? What is the, you know, how many people will this potentially impact? What are the numbers ultimately too? And then the third is, does this have A+ scalability? So scalability can be geographic, it can be across socioeconomic, it can be all sorts of things. So it really, those three things, which there are quantitative and qualitative measures for all three of those categories, are part and parcel of how I do evaluations for both my Stanford fund and also my corporate fund.
Right. So in the upcoming BWT event, what are the key things you're looking forward to?
I absolutely love these events in terms of connection, right? I've been involved in a number of BWT events. I am very appreciative to continue to get an invite. And I think the last one was really great because there was this kind of speed dating event, right? So in between the main panel and the breakout sessions, there was a great little connection period where, I mean, you don't really know who you're going to be linked with, which is, it's a nice alternative because sometimes that naturally happens if you're, you know, bumping shoulders at an event, but because we're not able to do that, you know, in current times, it's a good a replacement.
So does these events make you updated about the upcoming or the current technology from different markets, like how we discussed that, you know, even the culture barriers are there, but in such events, do you think we can discuss about what is happening and it gives you a good insight on other markets as well?
For me, I think so I have a three-prong approach to the discovery process. The events make up a large portion of it. And it used to be in person. That was one of the great parts of my job, was being able to travel and meet new people and go to these events. And then additionally to that, I believe there's, you know, the CVC acts as part of it. It's a funding perspective, right? You have a little bit of a different angle if you have direct connection with some of these other larger funds, or just being involved in some of the VC events that are available like online now. And then the third is kind of an academic approach. So we have standing experience and also a lot of relationships with Stanford, as I've mentioned. We are involved in 2 corporate programs. We've been involved in corporate programs with Berkeley, Oxford, Cambridge, so University of Southern California, and MIT. So we do a lot of investment into the ecosystem, right? Especially in Thais who have gone to these schools and then either come back or stay in those regions. So we've set up even kind of like homesick groups for, you know, Thais in these different, in Southern California and also in the Massachusetts area. So there's a lot of crossover, I think, in what these three things provide. But for me, things like Build World Tech and events really help you get connected to the other people who fill these roles in other organizations. And you can compare notes and you can, kind of suss out if you are on to the same thing or if there's opportunities that you're not aware of. So that's what I most appreciate about these events is like, meeting with my counterpart in different organizations.
So thank you so much, Alan, for joining us today on RealtyNXT. It was great to have you on board and talk about, especially I found the CVC role very interesting, and we had a lot of questions on that front from our viewers also. And I'm sure people in India and even in other Asian countries would understand more on the technology front, and the adoption of the technologies is happening, and it will happen sooner further.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation, and looking forward to Build World Tech.
Thank you so much.
All right. Have a nice day.